Thursday Night Tailgate, where the spotlight is always on the positive. Tune in Thursday night from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time to hear your favorite NFL legends, players, and coaches sharing their stories. Now back to Chris and Bob.
I wouldn't joke about anything else that happens here tonight.
All right, now back with us and making his 10th appearance with us on the show is not only one of our favorite guests, but also one of our favorite people, and that's Sirius XM NFL channel radio host and TNT Hall of Famer, Zig Fracassi. You can hear Zig hosting multiple shows on Sirius XM NFL, the NFL channel there, many on the football side, but also This Week in College Hockey. Zig is one of the great interviewers you'll hear anywhere, and we are honored that we got to induct him into our Guest Hall of Fame back in 2015, and even more so honored to call him a friend, because a finer individual you will not find anywhere on the planet. And we're excited he is back with us again tonight here on Thursday Night Tailgate. Hey, Zig, Chris, and Bob, how are you, my friend?
Hi, Zig. Hey, fellas, I'm doing well. I'm the one who did not knock Bob Lilly offline, by the way, like a Tingelhoff block back in the day, so I'm innocent.
We appreciate it, Zig. I'm sure it wasn't you, my friend.
Thank you. He's one of my heroes, by the way, you know.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to get from you as a Cowboys fan. You know, what are your memories of Bob Lilly?
Well, Chris, probably not a whole lot, because that was like during the grade school era, if you will. But I do remember, you know, when I was a kid and I first got infatuated with the Cowboys, you know, they had the hot cheerleaders, they had the coolest uniforms, they had Roger Staubach, and I certainly remember, you know, number 74, and, you know, it was George Allen, the legendary coach, who once said that he thought Bob Lilly was the best defensive tackle to ever play the game. You know, here's a guy that embodied what the Cowboys were striving to be back then. He was the first draft pick, local kid from TCU, and then, you know, went on to an absolutely brilliant career. He was part of the build, and then ultimately, through some ridiculously frustrating losses in the NFL championship games to Green Bay, some bad playoff losses to Cleveland, that debacle in Super Bowl V against Baltimore, and then they finally won one in Super Bowl VI. So this guy felt the pain, and he was really, along with Staubach, probably, and Don Perkins, really, I think the first real big stars the Dallas Cowboys had through their infancy into the 70s.
So, changing gears just slightly, Zig, I want to get your thoughts on the Cowboys draft. Looking at the players that they brought in, did they fill the holes that they need to fill in order to, you know, be more competitive next season and be right up there with the Eagles?
Chris, I think they did. You know, I mean, here's a franchise that, you know, people snickered, oh, they were 9-7 last year. They beat, you know, Philadelphia in the last game, which was meaningless. I mean, this is the first time in about a decade that they finished this year back-to-back over 500 seasons, so I think they needed to have some momentum. You look at, obviously, the draft, and Leighton Vander Esch, here's a young man who basically is a Sean Lee clone, because he tackles everything. He's always around the ball. And, you know, I think that's going to be the guy that ultimately replaces Sean Lee on this roster. Now, could they have gone receiver maybe? You know, could they have selected a Ridley or somebody like that? I suppose so, but they obviously felt that they had better value as far as later in the draft. I think Connor Williams is a guy that could wind up starting right away. And who knows, he may wind up starting sooner than later, especially if they're not able to get Zach Martin signed, although I believe, you know, that'll ultimately come through for them. And then Gallup, kid out of Colorado State, runs really good routes, has got really good hands, and he's going to blend into a receiver core that may not have the biggest names, but you know what? I think that's maybe part of the Dak-friendly mantra that Stephen and Jerry Jones want. And what I mean by that is you're not going to have to deal with the Dez drama anymore. Yes, you're going to miss Jason Witten because he's a leader, but it's the 2017 Witten, not 2007. So now you're going to have guys who aren't going to be as demanding with the ball, and you look at it that way. and you got Zeke for a full year. Scarborough, I thought, in the 7th round was a shrewd pick. So you add a receiver and a running back to help make it Dak-friendly. Yeah, and then they satisfied some other needs throughout the draft. So, again, guys, let's give it 3 years, and then we can give it an accurate grade. But from what they did as far as need standpoint, can never have enough linemen or linebackers. I think the Cowboys, on paper, did very well.
So just to take that a half a step further, Zig, and you mentioned, Dez gone, Witten gone. They did bring in Tavon Austin from the Rams. They got Alan Hearns from the Jags and Deontay Thompson from the Bills. So you've got those guys at receiver, right? Is that enough from a weapons perspective to deter teams from stacking, 8 guys in the box, stop Zeke, and take their chances with those guys as wide receivers against, teaming up with Dak?
Yeah, I mean, that goes to the point, Chris, where, you may not have your alpha male, so to speak, but at the same time, if you're Dak Prescott, now you've got some other targets that you can use. It'll be really interesting to see what ultimately happens with Terrence Williams, who may be in a bit of jackpot. I mean, gosh, he called out his former Baylor teammate, the Kendall Wright there for smashing his car, and then, the denial coming from the agent, from, the Vikings and all that. So this could be a really tricky legal situation involving Terrence Williams, who's expected to have a big year. But you've got some talent there. Noah Brown's a kid that I liked coming out of Ohio State a couple of years ago. Remember, he had the 4-touchdown game against Oklahoma on national television. Wilson's a nice, sure-handed kid in the 6th round. So, again, not the biggest names, but I think there's the distribution. I think you're going to see Tavon Austin also used a little bit in the backfield, so some gadget plays, if you will. I think, guys, where the real concern is going to be ultimately, you're not going to replace Jason Witten. You just don't. The guy is, I think, one of the all-time 10 top Cowboys with Mr. Lilly and Staubach and all of them. So now, they like Swaim. They like Jarwin quite a bit, big target from Oklahoma State. Rico Gathers, if the kid actually gets on the field, man, he creates an absolute nightmare for a mismatch. If a linebacker's trying to cover him, and then the kid Schultz out of Stanford, who kind of emulates Witten. So there's a lot of numbers there, maybe not a lot of superstars, but I think competition, good competition breeds, good camaraderie. And I think in the end, maybe having enough depth and spreading the ball around and not having an alpha male may actually be good, as I mentioned, for the Dak-friendly era in Dallas.
Bob, questions for Zig?
Zig, it's always an honor to speak with you, sir. And I want to talk a little bit about the local teams here up in New York. Zig, I mean, Chris had asked me early in the show about the Jets, their quarterback situation. Zig, obviously everyone thought that Petty and Hackenberg would be out of here, but they're still left with a very strange situation, Zig. By that I mean, we all are told that McCown is the tutor, Darnold's the student. You got Bridgewater in the middle here, who still think they can play in this league. He's like the middle of a sandwich here. What should happen, Zig? I mean, if Bridgewater does very well, does he have a shot at starting? And then does the other guy tutor him on the side? What do you see happening this coming season?
Bob, I would say that McCown is still the guy. Again, listening to different reports, some say that Bridgewater is not very much further along than he was in Minnesota. Others would say that, he is progressing a little bit better. I would be stunned if Teddy Bridgewater is able to play this year. Again, coming back from an injury where basically if the paramedics weren't there, they may have had to take the guy's leg off. This is how gruesome this injury was when he was with the Minnesota Vikings. Josh McCown, such a class act. I've gotten to know him over the last few years, and he's one of those guys that'll just step up and do whatever is best for the team. I'd be willing to bet, he's going to mentor Sam Darnold. So I think Darnold obviously is looking third at the depth chart right now. But again, with Bridgewater, you don't know what you got. With Josh McCown, the guy was having a terrific year before he got hurt last year. So obviously the Jets thought enough to bring him back. I like where they are right now. And you mentioned Petty and Hackenberg. I remember Adam Kaplan, who was one of my co-hosts on NFL Radio. He quoted a personnel director that said after he was drafted, it was going to take a minimum, guys, of 2 years to even see the field because he was so behind in what they did from what they did at Baylor. Unfortunately, never saw the field, but it wasn't that pretty. And Hackenberg, wow, talk about a miss for a second-round pick, although he worked with the quarterback guru Jeff Christensen, fixed his mechanics a little bit, maybe becomes a good backup quarterback in Oakland for Derek Carr. But to the Jets quarterback situation, I still think it's going to be Josh McCown the opening Sunday of the season.
And Zig, that other team in New Jersey, we haven't spoken with you since the draft and the whole Saquon Barkley thing. People are excited. The coach seems excited. The fans are excited for the new leadership. What do you think of Barkley? What do you think of the pick? And what do you think of the future of this team, near future?
Chris, I happen to think that Saquon Barkley could be a real can't miss when it comes to playing in the National Football League. Now, obviously, that's a lot of hype and pressure on a young man, but it seems as though just what I was able to see, he carries himself extremely well. I mean, the guy looks like he's going to have either a modeling career or a media career afterward because he knows how to handle the press. The guy looks like he's an Adonis out there, so he keeps himself in outstanding shape. So obviously, I think that's going to be, a storyline to watch. I think having Jonathan Stewart, the former Panther, in that backfield is a nice compliment and a good role model for him. Obviously, Dave Gettleman knew Jonathan from his days with the Carolina Panthers. And then you look, obviously, Hernandez. Some thought that he was going to be a first-round pick. He slipped to the second round. And then obviously now with Solder on that left side, all of a sudden you've got a vastly, on paper anyway, vastly improved left side of the line. And then you look at some of the other picks. B.J. Hill was added to the defensive line, McIntosh as well. So it looks as though, and Carter, the kid out of Georgia. So they addressed some needs. I don't think there's any doubt Dave Gettleman wants to get back to what the Giants have done traditionally over years, run the ball, play great defense, and have Eli be a compliment. I'm not stunned that they didn't take a quarterback in the first round. Lauletta was kind of the flavor of the month as far as sleepers in the draft. Had a really good Senior Bowl, the kid out of Richmond. So the Giants, again, on paper, look like they've done very well on the draft, but I still think some questions remain, especially on that defense, which was so good a couple years ago, wasn't nearly as good last year.
Zig, let's talk a little hockey. Can the Vegas Golden Knights, can they take this thing all the way? Because the Capitals winning a Stanley Cup, for me, would be on par with the Ravens winning a Super Bowl. Just can't have it. So tell me the Golden Knights are going to win this thing.
Well, you know what, Chris? I'll say this. My heart says Vegas, but I'm afraid my head's going with Washington. Hey, now, I know you're a Penguins guy here, and you did a number on them all those years, but how ironic is this now, Chris, for Washington to win? Guess who they have to go through now in net? Right. Marc-Andre Fleury. I mean, can you? The storylines here are ridiculous. You got that going on, and then, just for laughs, the current team George McPhee built up against the team George McPhee left and built up the Washington Capitals. So I'll tell you, the storylines are just outstanding. And, the Vegas storyline, I think, has been absolutely terrific. Let's face it. People are saying the system was rigged. The last time I checked as far as the expansion, I says, all right, did Vegas get Sidney Crosby? Did Vegas get Connor McDavid? Drew Doughty? Jonathan Quick? Patrick Kane? None of those guys are playing for Vegas. What George McPhee did was he knows the league so well. He took guys that he figured were going to be hungry from being cut or exposed to the expansion draft. You got a 3-time Cup winner in Fleury who's the anchor, and it turns out he's really the leader of the team. So they did that well. They stockpiled picks. And you really hate to sort of equate human tragedy, but obviously, guys, what happened the week before the regular season started with that horrific shooting that claimed those 58 lives there at the outdoor concert, that team, guys, rallied so much around their community. They went to the hospitals. They went to the different places to comfort the families and friends of those injured or lost. And I've said this all along, that I thought that in a town of transients and people, from all over the place, they actually helped make a community out of Vegas. In other words, the people from Chicago, Buffalo, Boston, wherever they may be from, all of a sudden became Vegas Golden Knights fans because they responded so well. And then I think from that, they had that, us against them attitude throughout the year. They deserve to be where they're at, guys. There's nothing fluky about this at all. And I think it's maybe one of the greatest, if not greatest, success stories, at least in my lifetime, how a one-year team could advance like they have thus far. It's really a story for the ages.
And Zig, you also do college hockey, and we saw Minnesota Duluth win the national championship this year as a number 3 seed in the tournament. They got past a couple of number 1s in Ohio State and Notre Dame to win the national championship. Talk about them. They came up a game short last year. This year they come back and get it done.
Yeah, I mean, here's a program that's kind of flown under the radar the last few years because, let's face it, when you're in that state of Minnesota, you got the Golden Gophers. You got, of course, St. Cloud State that's been a power for many, many years. But, with Scott Sandelin, who's done an absolute wonderful job with that program, they basically had a lot of guys come back from the year before. And it was just one of these things. For example, a Dylan Sandberg wound up with, getting some big-time national championship experience. Billy Exel. I mean, they have some of these guys that have kind of flown under the radar. Nick Swaney, Riley Tufte, a first-round pick of the Dallas Stars. And they played a very, very sound defensive system. Ironically enough, guys, they were the last team to get into the NCAA tournament. And it was weird, Minnesota, with their legendary coach Don Lucia, who retired this year, they had a 95% scenario going in towards like the final weekend. Then imagine this, everything that could happen to go against them did. They wound up being left out. Duluth gets in, makes his big-time run, and then ultimately beats Notre Dame. And so what a terrific run. And by the way, that was their second national title in 7 years. Their other title came in 2011. The venue, XL Energy Center in St. Paul, Minnesota. So about a 2-hour drive, they win their second title in 7 years with predominantly most of their fans there in the stands at the XL Energy Center. You can't write that up any better than that.
Bob, one more for Zig before we let him go?
Sure, Zig. I got to cross over to basketball. The big story here in New England is the Celtics right now, obviously, in addition to how the Red Sox are doing. But the Celtics, Zig, if you had told people beginning of the season, they would lose Irving and Hayward, and they're on the verge of going to an NBA final, does that have more to do, Zig, with the hidden talents of this team, or is it a Brad Stevens thing?
Bob, I think it's a combination of quite a few things. And, obviously Gordon and Kyrie are the two big names here, and more Kyrie towards the end of the season. He missed the last stretch of games. But, here's a guy like Daniel Tice, who was brought in from, I think it was Germany. And like anybody's wondering who the hell he is, before he got hurt, he was one of the best 6 men in the league. So this goes to Danny Ainge knowing personnel, who learned his lessons from, I still believe, the greatest GM of all time, any sport, anywhere in Red Auerbach. I mean, anybody that can get Bill Russell for the Ice Capades is a great GM. So, I mean, People in Boston know that story, believe me. And then, everybody said the Celtics should have drafted Fultz. Well, seems as though Jason Tatum's done pretty darn good. Jaylen Brown, here's a guy really starting to emerge in his second year. Al Horford, who's supposedly average. Guy had maybe his best year all around in the NBA. So I think there's a combination of guys being motivated, and I think Brad Stevens, for X's and O's, is probably the best coach in the game. And the frightening thing, guys, if you're the NBA, you figure Kyrie and Gordon both return next year, and then, just for laughs, Celtics still have a stockpile of picks from that trade that keeps giving with the Nets. So you wonder if Trader Danny's got some other things up his sleeve. So, the one thing, though, I think for them before they become truly great, they got to learn to win on the road. They've done that only once in the playoffs this year, so I wouldn't be stunned if there is a Game 7 against the Cavs, because Cleveland, you figure, come back at home. But if you're a Celtics fan, they're set now for about the next decade. And again, that's just the shrewd Danny Ainge. Learn from the best in red. And the thing about that too, and I'll wrap up the point with that. When Danny Ainge was playing, red hung on to the big three. And clearly they were getting old, and, obviously they never recovered after that from the Len Bias tragedy. If Red would have dealt McHale or Parrish, they may have stayed competitive longer. I think Danny Ainge realized this. And he says, if I ever run a team, that's never going to happen. And that's why he's been able to make all the moves that he has, and that's why the Celtics, they are where they are right now.
Sig, before we let you go, remind our listeners, A, how they can follow you on social media, and B, all the different shows that you're a part of and that we can tune in to listen to over on Sirius XM.
Well, Chris, always thank you for letting me spread the word there. I'm on Twitter at Zig Fracassi, ZIGFRACASSI. Also there at Facebook as well. Right now we're in off-season mode on NFL radio, but we still have some great shows. I'll be there Saturday and Sunday, 2 to 6 Eastern Time each day. Of course, I got weekday updates Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday between 1 and 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Top of hours are all sports updates on the platform of channels like NFL, Mad Dog, NHL Radio, believe the college channel, so you can hear me there, and then NFL updates at the bottom of each hour. And then been doing some stuff for NHL Network Radio. In fact, I'll be there tomorrow at noon Eastern Time with a segment there. I'll be covering the Stanley Cup Finals when they go to D.C., and then other than that, not a lot going on, but that's primarily where you can get me.
He is Zig Fracassi, one of the greatest radio show hosts in the history of broadcasting. And if you think I'm exaggerating, you've never listened to one of his shows. Go check him out on Sirius XM, and you're going to see exactly what we're talking about. Zig, thank you so much for taking time out of your night to come back and be a part of the show. It's always a privilege for Bob and I to get to spend some time with you.
Chris and Bob, always a pleasure as well. And when I see you guys tweeting out, I always say you guys keep the memory of the great NFL players that maybe weren't, the Hall of Famers or the big superstars, although you had Mr. Lilly on tonight. What you guys do to keep the memory of those guys going and what they're doing today, and maybe the different fights or issues or what they're doing with their personal lives now, I think it's fascinating. You guys need to take a bow too.
We appreciate you very much, Zig. Thank you for saying that. It means a great deal to us. Take
Chris,
care, my friend.
Bob, thank you.
All the best to you and your family.
Love you, Zig.
All right, guys. You too. Take care.
Good night.
Hi. See you, Zig. That is Zig Fracassi, and again, you can follow him on Twitter at Zig Fracassi. And Bob, like I say in his intro, and when we get the privilege of having him on the show, a finer individual you will not find.
Yeah, and I think his Hall of Fame status with us is more of him being a friend and just his demeanor than anything else. But as you saw and heard, we can skip around to Eddie Sports, and he doesn't skip a beat. He is a great journalist and a great friend. And again, he's joined me on the TV side. He's just one of our faves, Chris. Really, we're honored to speak with him on a regular basis.